There are connections that do not announce themselves loudly. They do not arrive with certainty, promises, or perfect timing. Instead, they enter quietly, unsettling the inner world before they ever touch the outer one. This person did not come into your life by accident, nor did the bond form without purpose. What you are experiencing is not confusion born of emptiness, but tension born of depth. When someone truly loves you, the psyche often resists before it surrenders. Love activates forgotten wounds, dormant fears, and unexamined beliefs about worth and belonging. That resistance can look like distance, inconsistency, or silence, but beneath it lives an undeniable pull. The unconscious does not release what has meaning so easily. It tests, retreats, and circles back again. Notice how this person remains present even when they try to pull away. Notice how your absence disrupts them, how your presence alters their emotional rhythm. This is not indifference. This is an inner conflict between what feels safe and what feels true. Genuine love threatens the structures the ego has built for protection, and so the mind hesitates while the soul already knows. You may feel tempted to give up because the connection demands patience, self-respect, and clarity rather than control. But giving up would not bring peace. It would only postpone understanding. The bond exists not to trap you, but to awaken you. It asks you to stand in your value without chasing, to remain open without self-abandonment. Do not confuse struggle with absence of love. Some connections arrive to be integrated, not rushed. They require both people to confront themselves before they can truly meet each other. If this person keeps returning in thought, emotion, and action, it is because something unfinished is seeking completion. Hold your ground, but keep your heart soft. Trust what feels calm beneath the confusion. Real love does not always come ready, it comes real. And what is real does not disappear simply because it is afraid. True love rarely announces itself with certainty or spectacle. It does not arrive fully formed, confident, or immediately comfortable. Instead, it enters quietly, slipping past the conscious defenses of the mind and settling first in the unseen layers of the inner world. Before any outward change occurs, before conversations shift, decisions are made, or paths are altered, something subtle begins to stir inside. Thoughts become less orderly. Emotions surface without clear cause. The familiar inner landscape no longer feels as stable as it once did. This disruption is not chaos for its own sake. It is the psyche responding to something meaningful. When true love touches the inner world, it awakens parts of the self that have long remained dormant or protected. Old memories, unhealed wounds, and forgotten longings rise to the surface, not to punish, but to be acknowledged. The mind may attempt to explain this disturbance as anxiety, confusion, or doubt. Yet, beneath these reactions lies recognition. Love challenges the stories we have told ourselves about who we are, what we deserve, and how safe it is to be seen. It questions the roles we have learned to play and exposes the fragile structures we have built to avoid pain. This inner upheaval often precedes any outward movement because the psyche understands the magnitude of what is at stake. True love is not merely an addition to life. It is a force that rearranges it. Before the outer world can reflect this shift, the inner world must renegotiate its balance. The ego, whose task is to preserve stability, resists this change. It clings to familiar patterns, routines, and identities, even when they no longer serve growth. As a result, love may feel threatening at first, not because it is harmful, but because it demands expansion beyond what feels controllable. In this stage, silence, hesitation, or emotional withdrawal often appear. These are not signs of absence, but signs of processing. The unconscious works slowly, integrating new emotional realities with old survival strategies. Love exposes contradictions, the desire for closeness alongside the fear of loss, the longing for intimacy alongside the instinct to protect oneself. These tensions are felt inwardly long before they are expressed outwardly, creating a sense of internal disarray that can be difficult to articulate. As the inner world shifts, perception itself changes. The person who evokes this love occupies thought without effort. Their presence lingers, even in absence, influencing mood, creativity, and self-reflection. Ordinary experiences take on new emotional weight. What once felt neutral now feels charged with meaning. This is the psyche reorganizing around a new center of gravity, one that has not yet found expression in action or commitment. Only after this inner reconfiguration begins to settle does the outer life start to change. Choices feel different. Priorities rearrange themselves. What is tolerated, avoided, or pursued no longer aligns with the old self. True love does not rush this process. It allows the inner world to be reshaped first, knowing that any outward expression without this foundation would be fragile. The quiet disruption is therefore not a warning, but an initiation and invitation to become more whole before love is fully lived. Emotional resistance is often misunderstood as indifference, avoidance, or an inability to feel deeply. Yet, in many cases, it arises precisely because the feeling is too deep to be approached carelessly. When emotions carry real weight, the psyche does not move toward them casually. Instead, it hesitates, pauses, and sometimes pulls away, not out of absence, but out of self-preservation. What appears on the surface as resistance is frequently the mind's attempt to regulate an experience that feels transformative, destabilizing, or beyond familiar emotional territory. Depth of feeling brings with it vulnerability. And vulnerability threatens the structures the self has built to remain intact. When someone touches an unguarded part of the inner world, emotional defenses instinctively rise. These defenses are not conscious decisions. They are learned responses shaped by past experiences of loss, disappointment, or rejection. The nervous system remembers what the mind may have forgotten. As a result, when a connection carries the potential for genuine intimacy, the body and psyche respond with caution. Resistance becomes a buffer between the known and the unknown. This resistance often manifests as mixed signals, emotional withdrawal, or internal conflict. One part of the self moves toward the connection, while another part pulls back, creating tension and confusion. This inner struggle is not evidence of shallow feeling, but of competing needs, the need for closeness and the need for safety. When feelings are superficial, there is little at risk, and therefore little reason to resist. It is when something truly matters that the psyche begins to negotiate, test, and slow the process. Emotional depth also carries the threat of change. To feel deeply is to allow one's inner landscape to be altered, and change always involves the loss of old identities, familiar habits, and established emotional boundaries. Resistance arises as the ego attempts to maintain continuity, fearing that surrendering to feeling will dismantle what has been carefully constructed. The mind asks not whether it feels, but whether it can survive what it feels. In this way, resistance becomes a form of internal questioning rather than emotional absence. There is also an unconscious intelligence at work. Deep emotions are rarely integrated all at once. They require time to be understood, metabolized, and placed within the broader narrative of the self. Resistance slows the process, allowing the psyche to adapt gradually rather than become overwhelmed. This is why intense connections often unfold unevenly, with periods of closeness followed by distance. The feeling remains constant beneath the surface, even when expression fluctuates. Misinterpreting resistance as a lack of feeling can lead to premature withdrawal or unnecessary self-doubt. In truth, resistance often signals that something meaningful is being protected until it can be held with stability and self-respect. When the inner world feels safe enough to contain the depth of emotion, resistance softens naturally. What emerges then is not a sudden creation of feeling, but the conscious recognition of what was already present, waiting for the right conditions to be lived openly. Inner conflict arises when love encounters the invisible architecture of fear that has been built over time to ensure emotional survival. These protective patterns are not signs of weakness. They are strategies learned in moments when openness led to pain, abandonment, or disappointment. Over time, they become embedded in the psyche as habits of distance, control, or self-reliance. When love enters, it does not merely offer connection, it questions the necessity of these defenses. This questioning is what gives rise to inner conflict. Love invites closeness, honesty, and emotional exposure, all of which directly oppose the function of fear-based protection. The mind may desire intimacy, yet the nervous system remembers the cost of past vulnerability. As a result, two opposing forces awaken simultaneously, the longing to move toward love and the instinct to retreat to safety. This tension is not logical, it is experiential. One part of the self is pulled by the promise of connection, while another part is anchored to the need for control and predictability. Protective patterns often operate below conscious awareness. They shape reactions before thought has time to intervene. When love activates these patterns, confusion follows. A person may feel deeply drawn to someone while simultaneously finding reasons to distance themselves. The inner dialogue becomes fragmented, filled with contradictions, doubts, and emotional oscillations. This fragmentation is not a failure of feeling, but a signal that love is touching layers of the self that were never meant to be revisited so soon or so intensely. Fear does not arise because love is unsafe. It arises because love threatens the identity formed around self-protection. Many individuals unconsciously define themselves by how well they avoid pain. Love challenges this identity by asking for risk, trust, and the willingness to be changed. The ego resists not the person, but the loss of familiar emotional ground. What is known, even if limiting, feels safer than what is unknown but potentially fulfilling. Inner conflict intensifies when the protective patterns once ensured survival. If emotional distance once prevented heartbreak, then closeness feels dangerous. If independence once meant safety, then reliance feels like weakness. Love confronts these beliefs directly, not through argument, but through experience. The psyche struggles to reconcile present possibility with past memory, creating a sense of instability that can be deeply unsettling. This conflict is often misinterpreted as incompatibility or emotional unavailability. In reality, it reflects a threshold moment where growth is possible. The old patterns are no longer fully effective, yet the new way of being has not been integrated. Love exposes the gap between who one has been and who one is becoming. Until this gap is consciously acknowledged, the inner world remains divided. Resolution does not come through force or denial, but through awareness. As fears are recognized rather than obeyed, their grip weakens. Protective patterns soften when they are honored for what they once provided and released where they no longer serve. In this way, love does not destroy the self, it reorganizes it. The inner conflict, though painful, becomes the very process through which deeper emotional freedom is born. Presence despite distance reveals a bond that has not found resolution, yet continues to live beneath the surface with quiet persistence. When genuine attachment exists, physical absence or emotional withdrawal does not erase the connection, it transforms how it is expressed. The person may step back, create space, or reduce communication, yet the inner world remains occupied. Thoughts return uninvited. Emotions surface without clear cause. The attachment does not dissolve simply because distance has been created, it adapts, waiting in a less visible form. Unresolved attachment often arises when feeling exceeds readiness. The heart moves faster than the structures of the mind can support. Distance becomes a compromise between desire and fear, allowing connection to exist without fully confronting its implications. This is why someone can appear detached on the outside, while remaining deeply affected on the inside. Their actions may suggest separation, but their attention, memory, and emotional responsiveness betray an ongoing inner involvement. Presence is revealed not through constant contact, but through continuity. A genuine attachment leaves traces, a sensitivity to your absence, a subtle emotional shift when you reappear, an awareness that lingers even when no words are exchanged. The psyche does not let go of what carries meaning simply because circumstances or fear demand distance. Instead, it holds the connection in suspension, unresolved yet active, waiting for clarity or safety to emerge. This kind of presence often expresses itself indirectly. There may be repeated returns, sudden check-ins, or moments of unexpected vulnerability. Even silence can carry weight when it is charged with awareness rather than indifference. True detachment feels empty and final. Unresolved attachment feels unfinished. It contains tension, longing, and a sense that something remains incomplete despite the attempt to move on. Distance is frequently misunderstood as absence of care, but in many cases it is an attempt to regulate emotional intensity. When attachment feels overwhelming, space provides temporary relief without requiring emotional erasure. The individual creates distance not to sever the bond, but to survive it. This does not mean the attachment is healthy or sustainable in its current form, but it does mean it is real. Genuine attachment resists easy closure. It challenges the mind, its desire for clean endings and clear narratives. The unresolved nature of the bond keeps it alive in subtle ways, influencing mood, self-perception, and emotional availability elsewhere. Attempts to replace or forget the connection often fail, because the psyche recognizes its unfinished work. Presence despite distance is not a promise of outcome, but it is evidence of depth. It signals that the connection has touched something essential, something that cannot be dismissed by time or avoidance alone, until the underlying fears, desires, or truths are acknowledged. The attachment remains active, quietly shaping the inner world even in the absence of visible closeness. Some connections do not enter life to offer comfort or permanence, but to initiate growth that could not occur otherwise. Their purpose is not to complete you, rescue you, or provide immediate stability, but to awaken a deeper relationship with yourself. When such a connection appears, it disrupts familiar patterns and exposes areas where self-respect has been compromised, boundaries have been blurred, or authenticity has been deferred. The discomfort it brings is not a sign of failure. It is evidence that something essential is being stirred into consciousness. Growth begins when the connection challenges how you relate to your own needs and values. It asks whether you abandon yourself to be chosen, or whether you can remain grounded in self-respect even in the presence of longing. The bond becomes a mirror, reflecting not only desire but also the places where you have tolerated less than you deserve. Through this reflection, awareness sharpens. You begin to recognize emotional habits that once felt natural but now feel misaligned. The connection does not demand self-sacrifice, it demands self-clarity. Self-respect emerges as the central lesson. The connection tests whether you can honor your inner truth without controlling the outcome. It invites you to stay open without chasing, to care without losing yourself. In doing so, it reveals the difference between attachment driven by fear and connection rooted in wholeness. Each moment of uncertainty becomes an opportunity to choose integrity over impulse. This choice strengthens the inner foundation upon which all future relationships depend. Inner awakening unfolds as the connection brings unconscious material to the surface. Emotions intensify, patterns repeat, and questions arise that can no longer be ignored. Why does this bond affect you so deeply? What unresolved parts of yourself does it touch? These questions pull awareness inward, away from external validation and towards self-understanding. The connection becomes a catalyst for insight, not because it provides answers, but because it insists that you ask better questions. As awareness grows, the need for clarity replaces the need for reassurance. You begin to sense that the connection's value lies not in how it ends, but in how it transforms you. It teaches patience, discernment, and emotional responsibility. It reveals that love is not proven by endurance alone, but by the ability to remain aligned with oneself through uncertainty. In this way, the connection refines rather than consumes. Such bonds often feel unfinished because their purpose is ongoing integration rather than resolution. They linger in the psyche until the lessons they carry are embodied. Once growth has occurred, self-respect restored, and awareness expanded, the emotional charge softens. Whether the connection continues or fades becomes secondary to the inner shift it has already produced. What remains is a deeper sense of self, awakened through a connection that arrived not to stay but to teach. Real love does not always move forward in a straight line. It advances, pauses, retreats, and returns, guided not by impulse, but by the readiness of the inner world to receive it. Hesitation in love is often mistaken for uncertainty or lack of feeling, yet in many cases it reflects the opposite. When love is real, it carries weight, consequence, and the potential for transformation. The psyche senses this and responds with caution, not because it doubts the connection, but because it understands what is at stake. Hesitation arises when emotion reaches beyond what the conscious self has learned to contain. Love activates memories, expectations, and fears that belong not only to the present moment, but to an entire emotional history. The mind may slow the process to avoid overwhelm, creating pauses where reflection and adjustment can occur. These pauses are not empty spaces. They are active periods of inner work where feeling is being negotiated, examined, and gradually integrated into the sense of self. What vanishes easily is not love, but infatuation. Infatuation thrives on immediacy and dissolves when tension appears. Real love behaves differently. It remains present even when expression becomes difficult, lingers in thought, shapes emotional reactions, and subtly influences decisions long after outward contact has diminished. The absence of action does not equal absence of feeling. Often it signals that the feeling is being held carefully rather than acted upon prematurely. Integration is the true aim of real love. Integration means allowing the emotion to find its rightful place within the whole personality, rather than letting it dominate or be suppressed. This process takes time, especially when love challenges existing identities or life structures. The individual must reconcile who they have been with who they are becoming. Love cannot be fully lived until it aligns with self-respect, emotional capacity, and inner coherence. During this process, love may appear inconsistent. There may be moments of closeness followed by withdrawal, clarity followed by doubt. These fluctuations reflect an inner recalibration rather than emotional instability. The psyche tests whether love can coexist with autonomy, whether intimacy can exist without self-erasure. Until these questions are answered internally, love hesitates. At the threshold of expression, what persists through this hesitation is meaning. Real love does not disappear when it encounters fear or complexity. Instead, it seeks understanding. It waits for the inner world to expand enough to hold it without distortion. Even when distance is created, the connection remains active, shaping awareness and emotional growth. Integration does not rush, it unfolds. When love is finally integrated, it no longer feels urgent or chaotic. It becomes steady, grounded, and honest. Whether it is expressed outwardly or simply acknowledged inwardly, it remains real because it has been absorbed into the fabric of the self. Hesitation was never its enemy. It was the process through which love learned how to stay. And so, if you find yourself standing in uncertainty, do not mistake the pause for an ending. What is real does not rush, and what carries truth does not disappear, simply because it needs time to take shape. Trust the quiet work happening beneath the surface. Love that hesitates is not lost, it is learning how to belong without breaking what holds it. Remain rooted in yourself, open in awareness, and patient with the process. What is meant to integrate will find its way not through force, but through understanding.